What's up, everybody? It's your boy, Brandon, back with another edition of the Macro Insights podcast. But first, before we get started, a little disclaimer. I am not a financial advisor, and the guest is not giving financial advice. So everything you hear on this podcast is strictly opinion and should not be taken as financial advice. We disclose if we have any holdings discussed in this podcast, and you should not be following us as financial advisors. You should discuss this with professionals before you get involved or invested. And as always, it's not financial advice. So please take this strictly as our opinions and for entertainment purposes only. Now let's get into the show. All right. Welcome. David, Dr. Anas, welcome.
Hello.
All right, we'll give it a couple minutes here, let some people trickle in, and then we'll do a little intro, and then we'll get it rolling.
Sure.
Good evening, everyone. I hope everyone had a wonderful day.
We'll give it till like 8:03-ish, so a couple more minutes, and then I'll do the intro, and we'll let Dr. Anas take it away. All right, welcome in, everybody. Welcome in. So, for those who have been on the spaces, we're doing a little bit of a different format today. We have a very special guest, Dr. Anas, and I'll get into his intro in a second, but we're essentially going to have him just kind of go through what is going on in oil, OPEC, the EU sanctions, everything that's going around the energy markets, and we'll let him kind of go through his what he's seeing in the market and everything like that for the first 30, 45-ish minutes, and then we'll have people up for questions. And with that, I will go ahead and start the little intro. So if you haven't heard Dr. Anas speak before, he is one of my favorites and probably the most well-spoken that I've heard on the oil and energy markets. He actually had a outstanding newsletter that dropped on Saturday, December 3rd, which was right before the OPEC meeting on Sunday, the 4th. And he absolutely nailed it on what OPEC was going to do and the potential response from that. And so with that, Dr. Anas, welcome to the stage and welcome back to the space. And how are you doing tonight?
Thank you very much. Do you hear me clearly?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Hello, everyone, and it is a pleasure to be back. Everyone is wondering what happened in the market today and why prices declined. There were people who were expecting prices. As you all know, we had expectations from certain banks and certain people that prices should be about $125 right now. But probably that 125 should be like 100 less 25. So that's where we are today. Let's go back to OPEC meeting first, and then I will discuss Russia and then Venezuela. What is the objective of OPEC Plus? The objective of OPEC Plus is to manage and balance the market And within this market management and balancing the market, they want to reduce market volatility. Now, this is the declared objective. And they also believe that prices must be high enough to stimulate investment, because we are short on investment and we are short big time. So you need prices 90 and above to maintain, at least to encourage companies to invest, especially the national oil companies. So again, the main objective here is the declared objective is to manage the market, balance the market, reduce volatility, and maintain prices at levels where they can encourage investment for them and for others. But we all know that there are the undeclared objectives. And the undeclared objectives are related to making money, literally making, literally generating revenues for the government. But you cannot generate revenues and talk about revenues unless you talk about oil prices. Here is the problem. Since 2016, lawyers advised OPEC ministers not to talk about prices anymore. Why? Because we have that in OPEC thing in the Congress that's been there for over 20 years. Every time something happens, someone will move it and they vote on it. So kind of to hedge that and make sure that they will not be hurt by it, they told them not to talk about prices anymore. So publicly, they are not going to talk about prices, but we all know that the price is at the heart of it. So what OPEC needs in this case, they want to manage, or OPEC Plus, they are going to manage the market. They want to balance the market. They want to reduce volatility. They want prices high enough to stimulate investment. But at the same time, they want to generate revenues, and they wanted relatively higher prices. So imagine this, just before, let's say on Friday, now OPEC is going to meet on Sunday to achieve, to achieve all those objectives, what they need to do. To achieve those objectives all together, it was very clear the policy has to be flipping the contango into backwardation. That's what they needed to do. They would achieve all those objectives that I mentioned, and they would get the revenues, the price, and they get more stability in the market. They convince basically traders to come back to the market and have some more liquidity in the market, etc. So the solution was very clear, is to flip the contango into backwardation. The issue here is, okay, how to do it? Because there are several ways of doing that. Well, one way is just to cut production. How much? Well, I'm sure that we cannot all agree on a number, but it has to be large enough to flip the curve. But the problem with this choice is it is politically unattractive. And it has a problem, because when OPEC decided to cut production or to cut the ceiling, and I'm emphasizing the word ceiling because the cut on October 5th was 2 million barrels a day from the ceiling. The actual cut was way, way lower. We know now, because we are in December, that the cut was way, way lower than that. But the idea here is when they cut from that ceiling, there was an issue that the 2 million does not reach the lower guys. So the guys who were not able to meet their quota, they were not affected by it. The problem is, if you do an additional cut and you reach the bone, those small guys are going to scream and yell at you, and they may not get a consensus on the decision. So it's not popular in terms of politics with Biden and the Europeans, and it's not popular in terms of the politics of the organization itself to do the cut. The other choice basically is, if you really believe the rhetoric and that Russia is going to lose 1.5 million barrels a day, you are done. That's it. Sanctions will be imposed on on Monday, and the price cap is going to be imposed on, again, we are thinking of Friday here. sanctions will be imposed on Monday, and then Russian production and Russian exports are going to decline. You get your cut, no matter what, and then you can flip the curve. But that's not the case. Yes, the media is talking about it and politicians are going to talking about it, but you guys heard me before several times that those sanctions are not effective and the price cap is not effective, period. And we learned this long time ago. So the issue when we talk about these things and say, you know what, okay, those many of those ministers, some of them are young, some of them never studied this before, they are political appointees, etc. Some of them been there a long time ago, like the Saudi oil minister, and he knows the stuff, but the others don't. But it takes a person who went through this over the years, either studying it or living it, to understand that price caps do not work, sanctions do not work, and therefore this choice is not an acceptable choice. So what was the best choice for OPEC? What they should have done? If they cannot cut production, how they're going to flip the curve? Well, one way to flip the curve is, let's go back to October 5th. On October 5th, when they decided to cut the ceiling or the quota by 2 million, they have this from starting from November 2022 until the end of 2023. So this covers all 2023. Here is the problem. If you look at OPEC forecasts of a global oil demand, OPEC itself expects a massive, I say massive because this is really the right word, a massive growth in demand in the fourth quarter of 2023. So it is very clear that that cut is not going to take place in the fourth quarter of 2023. Why? Because to match the supply with demand, you need that cut to be in the market. So what you can do in this case to flip the curve is move the cut from the fourth quarter to the first quarter. In this way, you are not cutting production. You don't have an additional cut of production. You are just moving the fourth quarter to the first quarter. And if this is politically not acceptable, we'll make it for the first half of the year. And that's enough to flip the curve and achieve all the objectives of managing the market, creating stability, reduce market volatility, prices will go up, people will have more trust in OPEC, and at the same time, they can make more money. But it was very clear for various reasons because I don't know what happened, what they were convinced with, but it seems that they were through fear because of consultants or advisors that the sanctions and the price cap are going to reduce Russian production. And we know this did not happen. It was very clear, and we wrote this in the Substack newsletter on Saturday, that if OPEC does not do something, then prices will literally decline and decline by up to $10. And we are seeing already half of that. So it was very clear that prices will decline because of this. The market right now, any way you look at it, the sentiment is really bearish. What OPEC missed was a very important point, but it's not related to them because they are not traders and they are not in the market. If you look at what most traders do, they already made their money for most of the year. The market is getting really risky. So why you are going to enter into a trade that might cost you all your gains and therefore the $2-3 million commission at the end of the year or bonus? Just wait it out. So that's why we don't have liquidity in the market, because most traders just decided to preserve their gains and that's it. They don't want to buy. But at the same time, because of the decline in prices, some people, especially retail investors, want to sell and walk away. But there are no buyers. So the only way to sell is to lower prices. The issue here is we have some hedging being done. And hedging is bearish. And as prices decline, those companies that do not want to hedge, all of a sudden, they feel like, wow, if I'm going to go to 60, I better hedge right now. And that's bearish. The whole thing about Russia and the price cap, etc. It's a complete nonsense, and I will go over that in a few minutes. But let's go over the issues of China. Many people were saying, like, China is going to open this. Well, look, China is opening the door just like 2 inches, and that's it. Okay, so 2 inches is not going to get you an additional demand of 1 million or 1.5 million barrels a day. There is no way. And it's going to open the door 2 inches, but the economy is so weak and in trouble that it's not going to give you the demand that you want. Aside from that, you have other issues that are affecting the market. For example, if prices go up, we know for sure that China is going to use its strategic petroleum reserves. And to talk about the reserves, they already done this in 2018. The only reason we did not get $100 oil in 2021 was the use of SPR by China. No one talked about it at that time, and no one really paid attention to it. But they released massive amount of oil in 2021 to avoid prices that high. And the idea was very simple. They wanted to use the SPR in 2021, waiting for the first quarter of 2022, where seasonally the demand is lower and prices are lower, so they can refill their strategic petroleum reserves. Well, they ended up with Putin going to Ukraine, and prices went through the roof. So they got stuck. And that was really a bad policy on their part, because they put all their eggs in one basket. But they got lucky. All of a sudden, we have the sanctions and we have the discounted Russian oil. At the same time, they have all those lockdowns. So between the decrease in demand in China and the lower prices from the differential, basically were about $30. So oil was about 100. They were getting oil at 70. So they were able to fill their strategic petroleum reserve, and they were able to fill their commercial reserves. As we speak today, the total reserves in China right now in commercial and SPR is higher than that of the United States. And I can assure you, they are going to use it when they see fit. So if they open up and they really have a major increase in demand, they are going to use their SPR. And therefore, this bullish case, we have to be very careful with it when it comes to China. And let's not forget the dollar. The dollar is too high. Oil is priced in dollar. Every time the price of the dollar exchange rate or the dollar goes up, that means oil become more expensive in other currencies, including in China. And that is another problem. And for the poorer countries, they have to deal with this, and they have to deal with the inflation in various ways, including the cost of food, the cost of fuel, and everything else. So for them, it's very tough. With the higher dollar, things become very tough. And therefore, the growth in demand that will come from the recovery is way, way lower than expected. And that's why if you look at all the major forecasters, including OPEC and the IEA, EIA, and others, all of them revised their forecast down several times this year. And one of the main reasons for that was the higher dollar. So the sentiment is bearish for several reasons. And the next 3 weeks are the most dangerous ones. We'll see. Excuse me. We will see how things will work out in January. The other point related to OPEC meeting, and some of you heard me talking about this before. One of the major development that we've seen in 2021 is that for the first time in history, we've seen OPEC members and now OPEC Plus behaving differently from the past 50 years. What they've done basically is this. In the past, every time the demand went up and prices went up, many countries were not able to meet their quota. So they were not able to increase their production. So those who were bullish because those countries were not able to increase their production in recent months Look, this has been happening for 50 years. We've been there so many times. All you got to do is just read history. So this is not an issue. And I'm going to tell you one issue about this that's really where what I call them the ultra bulls got nailed. So they were not able, historically, they were not able to increase their quota, but the demand is there. So the big countries like Saudi Arabia and others with spare capacity, what they've done is they decided to increase their production above quota to compensate for the others. And the others got mad because the compensation lowered prices while they cannot change their production. So always OPEC was a failure because of that policy. Well, in 2021 was different. What they've done is decided, look, no one is going to compensate for anyone. So if the Saudi quota is 9.5, the Saudis are going to produce 9.5. If Biden call on them or Trump or anyone else, they don't care. It's 9.5. This is the new OPEC plus. That's it. And they were extremely successful in this. They were able to increase prices, as you all know, from an average about $40 to an average of about $75. And then, of course, the Ukraine thing happened. But the idea is we have this major development that took place then. But now in 2023, we realize that those guys have a lot of tools. It's not only playing with the production. And when you get the results out of OPEC meeting, you got to be very careful building a portfolio or buying or doing whatever. Because those meetings most of the time happen at the beginning of the month. This meeting happened on the 4th. This is by design. Why? Because Aramco official selling prices, the prices they declare for the next month, are mostly released on the 5th unless it's a holiday. So they want to get out of the meetings before the 5th so they can publish the prices. So the OPEC meeting is not complete without knowing what the OSP is. And the reason why, because the OSP can nullify the result of the meeting or can emphasize the results of the meeting. And we have enough evidence to show both. So that's why the OSP becomes extremely important in this case. And again, you heard me before talking about the difference between supplies and production. And we discussed all of this in the Substack newsletter that we issued on Saturday. And then we issued the OPEC comments after the meeting on Sunday, where production is one thing, supply is another. To give you an example, let's say you have a country with a quota of 3 million barrels a day, and they are producing 3 million barrels a day. So they are really buying by the quota. But all of a sudden you read the headline news that they increase supplies. Their supplies increase. You say, hold on just a second. I thought they were buying by their quota. Yes, because OPEC quota focuses on crude only, and that's production of crude. It does not focus on exports. It does not focus on products. It does not focus on NGLs. So what those countries would do basically is they might have some oil in storage. And if there is demand for it, they sell from storage and their supplies go up while their production is flat. So we got to be careful when we talk about production versus supplies. Or you hear about it that their production is flat, no change in production, but their supplies went down. Why? Because they are storing oil. Or literally moving that oil to domestic consumption. They are moving it to their refineries inside the country so they can export products instead. So there are many games those guys can play aside from changing production. Now, we talked about earlier a few months ago when we talked about, that was in June, when we talked about defending a $90 oil, and they did defend that. But here we got to be careful. I got to remind you here, given that my background is in private equity, that saying something is one thing, and the perception of what you said is something else, which is a major, probably the biggest problem on Twitter today, is that what you are saying is absolutely the truth, is absolutely accurate, but the perception of people of that tweet is completely different and could be the opposite. When I was in private equity, the biggest job was how to manage the perception of what you say, because that's very important. And Twitter is not that important because you are not going to, in private equity, we used to manage $18 billion. So that was scary stuff. On Twitter, okay, what's going to happen? Okay, some people are going to attack you and that's it. So it's not a big deal. But most of the problems on Twitter are related to perception, not to people saying the wrong things. People are saying the right things, but the perception of it is the wrong thing. And the issue here is about the $90 oil. Yes, they defended that, but the issue is, can they continue defending that? Because the action of defending it is one thing. What might happen on the ground is something else. So they will keep defending it until no longer being able to defend it, either because of a recession or various factors, etc. So we got to wait. Probably we need some more time to find out whether they're going to really work on that 90 or not. But if everything get loose and prices decline farther, there is a bottom where they will have a sudden extraordinary meeting, a big cut, and literally move the market. But they will not move until the benefits, the economic benefits and the political benefits are good enough. In a sense, I don't think that the Biden administration wants to see a $50 oil. In a sense, so they will get, just like during Trump days, they will get a green light that we have no problem if you cut at this stage. Related to that is the issue of the SPR. People are saying, well, now prices are going down, Biden administration can buy oil and fill up the SPR. The Biden administration cannot sell and buy at the same time. Even technically, for some caverns, they cannot do that. So they have to sell everything first until they start filling. And now they have the 15 million barrels that they need to sell in December and probably into January. But after that, they have the mandated sales from the Congress, which could add up to about 26 million barrels a day. So that's another bearish factor. And probably the Biden administration is going to keep the best for last. So if prices go up again sometime in the next few months, probably they will use them as Congress mandated sales. The problem with that is, will companies buy it because of crude quality? And that's a big issue. And this will explain to us what's happening with Venezuela. As you know, the Biden administration gave authorization to Chevron for 6 months to literally help PDVSA with the joint venture. They have 2 joint ventures with PDVSA and increase production. Strangely enough, the Biden administration, despite sanctions, they give the Italian INE and the Spanish Repsol exemptions from the sanctions to ship Venezuelan oil to Europe. It was the objective of the Biden administration all along, basically, to send all the oil and gas supplies to Europe because they want to secure Europe. They don't want the EU to be divided. They want to protect EU from the division because Putin's objective was to divide Europe. And the Biden administration was, okay, I'm going to make it united by providing all the energy sources I can, even at the expense of the Americans. And when I say even at the expense of the Americans, I got that from Biden. I did not make it up. All you got to do, just watch what he said during the NATO meeting in Europe. I think it was in Rome. They asked him about the higher gas prices for the American consumer. And he literally said, that's fine as long as Putin does not succeed. So the issue here is everything was directed toward Europe. But what's strange about the recent stuff with Chevron, that they give them 6 months extension, and then they put a condition. The condition is they have to supply that oil to the United States, And the question is why? Well, Chevron can do this and start doing it probably within a couple of weeks. They can start the first shipment. This is important because the Biden administration realizes that while they can still release another quantity of oil, whether by a presidential order or because of the Congress mandated amounts. While they can still do all of that, most of this crude is light sweet crude, and refiners do not want that. That's why U.S. exports are going through the roof, because we are exporting all that light sweet, and of course, some of that demanded the medium sour in the SPR, but the amount of medium sour that's left is very small. So where the replacement will come from? Canada cannot add massive amount or large amount quickly. They can add more by the end of next year, but they cannot add this like in the next few weeks and next few months. But Venezuela can. So if you look at the two joint ventures with Chevron, between Chevron and PDVSA, during the heydays, they produced only 200,000. So 200,000 barrels a day, that's maximum. When it comes to the market, the impact of that is very limited, very small. But when you look at the Gulf of Mexico area, and you look at the refiners there, and you bring them 200,000 barrels a day of medium sour, that's a lot, and that's really a wealth. So the conclusion of this, and you will find that in the Substack newsletter. By the way, there is a 1 week free subscription if you want just to read it. The whole idea is related to crude quality. So for those who've been following me for a long time, crude quality matters. Crude quality matters. You heard me saying this thousands of times. And this is exactly a perfect case of crude quality matters. So it's not about the quantity, it is about the quality. The other comment related to this is the fact that I don't think that the Biden administration is only working on Chevron. I think they are working on other things. Chevron already signed a contract with the PDVSA for those two joint ventures. Some people said they will not sign them because they are not getting paid. Well, it seems there are many deals under the table going on. We don't know what are they. But I think that the Biden administration is working with the Maduro administration, and they are going to reproduce the new and improved Maduro, and they might give U.S. shale producers an exemption, or they might lift the sanctions completely. But mostly they will work with exemptions to export a certain type of natural gas liquids, which for those who are familiar with the oil industry, we call it C5 or natural gasoline, probably about 150,000 barrels a day that they need from the U.S. So shale producers can benefit from that. They can send it to Venezuela, and they use that as diluent. So they literally mix it with the heavy crude so they can move it in the pipelines and ship it on ships. After the sanctions, U.S. producers were not able to send it to them, so they got it first from Russia, and then Iran started sending some, but not enough, and it's not a kind of constant basis. So that's why we see all the fluctuations and all the problems in the Venezuelan exports. But if Biden administration give them an exemption and give U.S. producers an exemption to sell them the diluent, then they can increase production within a very short period of time by 300 to 400,000 barrels a day, and that has nothing to do with the 200 that Chevron is working on. So they can literally get some crude that is needed by refiners. So Venezuela is about crude quality in this case, is not about quantity. Now we talk briefly about Russia. And first of all, on the sanctions, I studied sanctions over the last 110 years. And I wrote about this in various forms, in various ways, etc. I have a conviction that sanctions do not work and will not work. I've done field work on this. I know all the tricks in several countries, how they work these things up. And there is no way that sanctions will work. And if sanctions will work only if you have an island and you surround that island with a navy. But again, if you surround an island with a navy, why you need sanctions in the first place? It's over. So we've seen this in Haiti before, right? So Russians are producing more. Russians are exporting more. And Russians basically were able, yes, Europe was able to shift its supplies in terms of oil and natural gas and even coal. But Russians were able to do that too. Just to give you some numbers here, some percentages, for example, in November 2021, the share, 58%, that's in November 2021, 58% of Russian oil that was transported via the seaborne shipments went to Europe. Let me repeat that. 58% of seaborne shipments from Russia went to Europe. 58%. Right now, it's only 33%. It's 1.6 million. That's in November, last November. 1.6 million barrels a day, or 33%. So we have a major decline from 58% to 33%. But let's look at Asia. Asia was importing 1.3 million, or 28% in November 2021. Right now, it is importing an additional million and going up. So their percentage of Russian exports, 48%. So the shift already happened on both sides. Yes, the Europeans shifted, but the Russians shifted. And the big question here is, okay, in November, this is just this November, Russia exported 1.6 million barrels a day to Europe. Now we have sanctions. So where that 1.6 is going to go? So if you see in some tweets or some reports that Russian production is going to decline by 1.5 or 1.6, that's the reason, because they picked up that number. Well, this is not the way it works. The first fact is, once people realized 2-3 months ago that there will be sanctions, people booked shipments. Even the countries that want to impose sanctions on Russia, they booked shipments early. So they want to get more oil ahead of time before the sanctions. So the 1.6 basically is the higher number. Some of it is already transferable, but it went up simply because there was a big market for it at a higher price in some cases. Out of those 1.6, some of it basically will be transferred to other countries. There are so many ways. The Russians are playing this game worldwide with OPEC members, OPEC Plus, with India, China, Pakistan. Everyone is playing the game. They are storing oil in areas where no one could have even thought they are storing oil. But once that oil is stored and put on another ship, and the ship change ownership and change a flag and mix with another oil, etc., who knows what that oil is? So they are going to divert some of that, and then the other part basically will end up in Europe no matter what, either through loopholes, and there are many loopholes, or through all those games they are playing with other countries, they will play on Europe, and we have enough evidence to show that. In fact, some of the Russian oil is reaching the United States anyway. And based on our estimates, there will be about 300 to 400,000 barrels a day with no market. So what would they do with that? Would they end up with floating storage? Would they reduce production? Will they sell it at a very steep discount? Well, there are all kinds of options. My guess, this is my best guess on the situation, if they end up with 400,000 unsold, they will immediately announce maintenance program, and they will cover it with maintenance. So they will claim maintenance and say, well, we have a reduction because we are doing maintenance. So they are not going to accept defeat and say, well, it declined because of this, despite the fact that Novak announced the day before yesterday that the production might decline marginally because of this. But the companies are going to refuse that, and the companies are going to literally hide it under maintenance. As for the price cap, let's be truthful about it. The price cap, they adopted this simply because they need the Russian crude. They cannot afford to lose the Russian crude. They could have imposed an embargo or did something that really, something that's really effective. And the choice of 60, it wasn't a haphazardly choice. The choice basically was, again, to legitimize buying from Russia. Now, the EU is not going to buy from Russia. The United States is not going to buy from Russia officially. I repeat this word. Officially, they are not going to buy from Russia. So the price cap is not for them. The price cap is for everyone else. For those who are old enough, remember the UN oil for food deal with Iraq? Well, this cap is almost similar in terms of ethical issues and other things. Just kind of, I don't want to discuss that because it's really painful. That you still kind of, the white European telling the browns of Asia and the yellow of Asia or whatever colors you want to use, look, we are still there and you cannot do this and you cannot do this. Yes, our armies are not there and we are not controlling you, but we can still control you anyway. But I don't want to delve into that. The whole issue here is this. The price cap is 60. Russian oil now is below 50. It's very easy for companies to buy the Russian oil. They will get the certificate of origin. They will get the pricing and the bank certificate to prove that they bought it at 48 or 49 or 50 or even 55, which is below the 60. And then fax it or send it via email or via text to the insurance companies and the banks in London. And whoa, you are now legal and you can literally get the European insurance because you are fine. So why people thought that Russian oil production will decline because of the price cap? Almost everyone is legal right now. Now, you say, well, Russia already announced that if for countries that deal with the price cap, they are going to cut production too. Well, the Russians perfected the legal game. Look at what they've done with the ruble and how they forced the EU to pay in ruble. It was a legal game. Look at everything else they played in Sakhalin 1, Sakhalin 2. It was a legal game. Look at everything they played with all the sanctions and when they decided to cut gas exports or not to cut it. They played the legal game. What the legal game they played here? Look at the Russian announcement. The Russian announcement said countries that adopt this will be boycotted. They are not going to cut. They are not going to get the Russian oil. Again, countries. They did not say companies. And therefore, companies of those countries can play the game the same way I explained. And therefore, everyone is legal. They can buy that oil at 52, 55. They have all the paperwork, which is completely legal and correct and right, and everything is fine. And then again, send it to London. They get the insurance, they get the services, and no impact for the price cap. But for the rest of the trade, Russia bought a large number of ships, and then we have the Chinese ships, and we have the Indian ships, and we have all the others. They don't care about the price cap. They already have their insurance. And when we talk about this insurance, look at what happened yesterday and today in Turkey. Because this is what I love about what I do and what I love about economics and what I love about studying the oil market and energy markets. The unintended consequences of things. This is the most fascinating thing in life. When you talk about the unintended consequences of policies and regulations and laws, etc., just fascinating. The human motives are the same all over the world. The human motives, whether you talk about people who went to school or never went to school, people who live in the forest who never seen another human being, the incentives are the same. And here I'm going to take a minute to tell you a story, because this is a very important story for those who are still learning economics to learn. There was a period of time when there was an explosion of AIDS in India, and the UN got involved, and they sent their researchers to the fields. And after studying, after like 2-3 years, they found out that most of the problems happen on major intersections of major highways. That's where the biggest problems. And when they dug deeper, they found out there are prostitution houses on those intersections. And the truck drivers and others basically come there, and then they go through India. So they wanted to solve the problem without causing another problem. So they literally introduced condoms at the expense of the UN, and they trained those girls. Some of them, they don't know even how to read and write. They trained those girls and told them that your customers or clients have to wear condoms. And that saved your health, saved this. And they left. Well, a year later or 2 years later, they found out that AIDS did not go down in those areas. So they went back and tried to find out why. And they found out that the girls were giving two pricing. They are telling the client, if you want with condom, the price is this. If you don't want a condom, the price is way higher. We are talking about some of the girls, again, never went to school, but they realized by their own instinct how to make money. So every time, that's why when we talk about why communism or socialism is bad, because it really assumes that those people are idiots and they assume that the public do not understand and they don't know. And that's why we end up with all those unintended consequences. So what happened in Turkey yesterday? Turkey, we know that these are international waterways, but Turkey has some leverage over certain things. So when the EU started the sanctions and started the price cap requires insurance. And we know that Erdogan is a friend of Putin. So what they did immediately said, okay, we are going to demand insurance from everyone, not only from those coming from Russia. Oh, by the way, since those ships carrying Kazakh oil and they are coming from Russian ports, then they are subject to that too. And just happened the Kazakh ships, the ships that carrying the Kazakh oil are not subject to anything. So their insurance is with the Western companies. So what they did is they said, okay, no one is going to pass unless you show me a proof of insurance. And the paperwork is not enough because you have to verify it. And it just happened that they were able to verify all the Russian insurance. And they were not able to verify the European insurance. That's why the Russian ships passed and the Kazakh ships basically stayed. So everyone is going to play their games. And the irony here is, and this is really kind of funny because the Turkish government says, oh, we want to make sure that they have insurance in case of an accident or a spill. Well, for God's sake, if you are going to have 15 tankers next to each other, that's where you are going to have an accident and you are going to have an oil spill. Which means that it's very clear that the objective was not environmental. It was pure politics. My final comment before we open the floor for questions and comments is that if you look at what's been happening in Europe, it's really, I mean, things are getting, as I mentioned in one of the tweets, really weird. The transportation minister of Italy asked the EU to renege on the law that stops making gasoline and diesel cars in Europe by 2035. And I think this was predicted, but it came earlier than what we predicted. And there will be more of that. I think that date is going to be delayed, or it will be modified, or there will be too many loopholes in it. But that's coming from the EU itself. Norway basically asked the owners of the electric vehicles to not to drive their vehicles and use public transportation. Switzerland, 2 days ago, representatives are studying a law that will prohibit the use of electric cars under certain situations at certain times. Remember, all those countries were pushing for electric vehicles. Mazda, the company, they said that they cannot solve the distance issue and the charging issue. And therefore, their recommendation was for everyone to have two cars, one electric for short distances and one gasoline or diesel for the long distance. And as you all know, the day before yesterday, KLM, the Dutch airlines, suggested to its customers to use the trains instead of planes for short distances so they can reduce emissions. And you heard before, of course, about asking people in certain countries to take showers in cold water and raise the thermostat or lower the thermostat, etc. All these things, just things are getting weirder by the minute. In this case, in Europe, as a result, what this is telling us, everything we talked about today and other things we are reading in the newspaper, is that the driving force the driving force of politics around the world right now is energy security. You look at what India is doing, you look at what China is doing, the EU, the Biden administration, and others. The whole politics, the attacks on OPEC, the attacks on Saudi Arabia, etc. It's all driven by energy security. And the problem is, historically, why Europe is paying the price for this, because they sacrificed energy security at the altar of climate change. And now they are paying the price and they want to compensate. So everything right now is about energy security, and it is literally driving the politics, driving all the military support to Ukraine, and all those high prices, etc. A final side comment here. You heard some European leaders blaming the United States for high prices and how they became the profiteer of the Ukraine war. I have news for them, because we have some European friends who bought that or they drank the Kool-Aid of their officials. The reason why they are paying very high price, because they, China and India, decided in recent years to switch from long-term contracts to spot market. And that's what was it. It was the spot market. It has nothing to do with anything else. It was their problem, because until today, we have Russian gas that's coming to some European countries at contracted prices, long-term contracts. It's 1/5 of the LNG price. Why? Because the LNG price, basically coming from the United States, is a spot price. So it was their problem, thinking they are smart enough to outfox the market by focusing on the spot market. Everyone who is importing massive amount of energy, they have to create a portfolio, just like any financial portfolio. And the main objective will be to minimize risk. And that's the way they should look at it. Brandon, back to you.
All right, that was awesome. Great update on everything that's going on. Get yourself a glass of water there, Dr. Anas.
Well, I have some allergies basically causing me to cough. So
no, I'm just saying you were talking for quite some time, so I really appreciate that breakdown. And I did link his Substack up in the nest there. So yeah, like Dr. Anas said, you get a free week subscription to it, free week trial. So I definitely recommend that. This newsletter is outstanding, and it gives a breakdown of kind of everything he was going through: OPEC, EU sanctions, all that kind of stuff that he was breaking down. But I'm going to start letting up people, and we'll start getting into some questions here. I believe Royal Flush, you were first one to request, so welcome to the stage. What do you have for us?
Thanks very much. I guess my question is, Dr. Nas, do you see Russia doing something geopolitically to make another part of the world hot, so to speak, to try to ameliorate the discount that they're experiencing on their crude pricing? Thanks very much.
Couple of things here. Although I don't like to talk about politics much, just to keep things safe. But one thing is very clear to me, that the Russians are not going to go for a major confrontation, and whatever they do, it has to be legal. Legal, especially under international law. And the way I think is going to happen, because we have enough evidence to show that they played it right on several fronts when it comes to the legal issues. Probably Putin have some really good lawyers working for him. Because if you look at how they cut the gas to some countries and the way they cut it to others, those who've been completely cut they cut them at the end of their contract. They did not cut them a day before. They just waited until the contract ended. And then they cut them off. They said, okay, you sign. Here's a new contract. Sign it. And they said, no, we are not going to pay in ruble. It's okay. Bye-bye. That's exactly what happened. And then the other countries that have long-term contracts and they have issues with them, what they did, okay, well, we have not received the turbine yet. We have technical issues. Oh, we have not received the paperwork yet. Yeah, we received the paperwork, but the signatures basically were missing. So they played a different game, but still legal game. And we have not seen a true confrontation with the West on several fronts. Even I was one of the ones who was expecting a major cyber attacks, and we've seen very minor cyber attacks. Of course, the explanation for that is that the United States and Europe were smart enough to shut down most of the data centers in Russia and part of Ukraine. But still, they have agents probably around the world. We did not see those major attacks happening. Not only that, things are really confusing on several fronts. Why the United States is still importing enriched uranium at regular prices from Russia? They are still importing a lot of stuff. They are importing aluminum. The EU is doing the same too. And for God's sake, Zelensky every time on TV saying, oh, you need to have a price cap at $30 and you need to cut all exports. Well, the gas is going through Ukraine. There are a lot of strange things going on that if you really want to corner Putin, why you are not cornering him? And let's be clear about what happened. A lot of people think that the oil companies, the foreign oil companies left Russia and the service companies left Russia. None. They're still there. What they announced? No new investment. What Baker Hughes did? I mean, it's just amazing. Everyone is playing the game. Baker Hughes said, okay, I am going to sell my unit to my employees in Russia. So the company is still exactly the same, with the same structure, the same employees, the same people, everything is the same. But now the ownership is by the employees, not by an American company. Visa and MasterCard announced that they are withdrawing from Russia. What we know now, people still have MasterCard and Visa, and they are working with them inside Russia. There is no problem. It turns out that if you have a MasterCard or Visa, and you are Russian living in Russia, or even a foreign national but living in Russia, once you leave Russia, you cannot use that card outside Russia. But as long as you stay within Russia, Visa and MasterCard are working. There is no problem. And of course, you heard this story from me before when I was making fun of Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada. He was one of the first ones to go in support of Ukraine against Putin, and he, the hero who stopped the imports of Russian crude to Canada. And Canada does not import Russian crude. So we have all these things going on. Biden basically promised us that all Russian banks basically are out of the SWIFT system. No, they are not. So the whole idea here is the Russians are not going to go for a major confrontation unless it is they will do all the legal stuff. And therefore, if you look at the price cap, it's just protecting the revenues. I've been on shows in foreign TVs where Russian officials or Russian experts were on the same show. And all of them emphasized the same point. What was the same point? They said, why do you think a price cap is going to hurt us? Our average price right now of oil is similar to what we had in 2021. And we were fine. Why do you think that a cap is going to hurt us if it's the same price we got last year? Back to you.
Awesome. Wow. Yeah, I don't even know what to add to anything like that, but that's amazing. I appreciate that. And I believe, Phil, you're up next. He's connecting here. Phil, I think we got you up here. What you got for us? Phil, can you hear us?
Hey guys, I'm in my car. I completely forgot I requested, so I'm going to remove myself and go back to the audience. Carry on.
All right. I believe I want to say real Stephen Fat One. Welcome to the stage. What do you have for us? Do you have a question? Going once. Can you hear us?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Do you have a question?
Yeah, sure. Question is the price cap is not affecting Russian oil until we have Brent where it is now around 80 and Russian oil is going for below 60. But what if Brent goes back to 100 or 100 plus? And this is, the first question. What do we expect to happen if that happens? And then the second question is why oil is not reflecting the uncertainty of things that can go crazy from here.
Crazy, you mean bullish?
Yeah, crazy bullish. I mean, it's not reflecting the uncertainty that, Putin can say, stop the oil. I mean, oil usually reflects uncertainty. And, I think we are discussing a lot of weird things and a lot of uncertainty right here. And oil is going down.
All right. Generally speaking, if you look around the world and look at the countries with the largest black markets, you will find out that they have the craziest laws. And that's why they have a black market. And whenever you have laws and policies like the price cap, you are creating a black market. And if you end up with smugglers, and let me call them smugglers here for a moment, who are well experienced, well financed, and they are supported by technology and they are supported by big countries like China, and they got all the experience of the Iranians, the black market is huge and big. For the price cap to work, you need two things. First of all, based on what I know right now, and probably someone can correct me on this if I am wrong, the whole idea of the price cap came in from a Russian living in France. And to have this combination of a Russian living in France by itself can tell you something. I know some people might laugh at this, but this is kind of a Russian living in France. You are talking about really kind of a strange combination here. And you end up with a situation. So it was the suggestion from this person, and all of a sudden we have the Secretary of Treasury, Yellen, basically is obsessed with the idea. A lady who taught free economics and free markets for over 25 years at universities and created a couple of generations about free markets, all of a sudden at the end of her career is talking about exactly the opposite. To have a price cap and to enforce it, what you need. In a country, within a country, we had price caps, which we call it price controls. We had them in the United States in the 70s, where the government decided the prices. But look, it's the government, backed by the law, backed by the Congress, backed by the police, backed by the court system. We have a jail system, and you can punish those who are doing any violations and put them in jail. So in this case, a price cap might work. But even in this case, it failed miserably. And the experience of the United States was just beyond miserable in the 70s because of this price control. So even you have the law on your side and the court system on your side, and you have a jail system and you have a police and all this stuff, it failed. Now imagine you have a price cap on someone else outside your border, and the law is not on your side. The international law is not on your side. You don't have a court system. You don't have a police. You don't have an army. You don't have anything to enforce it or collect information. In fact, if you look at what Yellen said something kind of really silly. She said in a sense, I'm coming up with this word. So she did not say this word, but I'm coming up with this word. If you read her statements, the only conclusion you get from her is she expects everyone in the world to be a snitch. So if you have a tanker that violating this, she expects people who are working on the tanker will snitch, and the guy who's working in the bank will be a snitch, and the service company basically is a snitch, and the guys who are working in the port will be snitch, and they are going to call the United States and tell them about it, which is a complete nonsense. So the idea here is, in general, in theory, for the price cap to work, you need a price below the market price, like you said. So the statement you said is absolutely correct. If Brent becomes 100 and the price cap is 60, and then you enforce it with the Navy or military or some UN resolution or whatever, of course, it has to be General Assembly. It cannot be the UN Security Council because Russia is part of it. Then we are talking. But you don't have any of that. So what you end up in this case is the following. And whatever I'm going to tell you this, again, I'm going to say this, read my lips. What's going to happen is Brent is at 100 and the price cap is at 60. I have on Twitter, some of you already have seen, probably Brandon, if you are familiar with it, probably you can put it in the nest. I have a long thread of cartoons I made that explain all these situations with the price cap. And one of them basically is Yellen is telling Putin that we will put a price cap at 60. And he'll tell her, okay, hold on just a second. And he will call the president of China and he will tell him, she said 60. And the president of China will say, okay, I'll pay you 65. Remember, the market price is 100. Everyone will pay you above 60. So why sell it at 60? So it does not work. Back to you.
All right. That was great. Going back and forth there. I believe Bamsey. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Some of you guys with these Twitter names. But Bamsey, what you got for us?
Hey, Dr. Anasa, really appreciate your time. Chemical engineer here, so I work in the semiconductor industry now, and I confess I'm purchasing a diesel here in a couple of weeks. So I agree with you. Liquid fuels is certainly favorable. My question is more in regards to ammonia and fertilizer, and I'm just wondering. I'm wondering if you could elaborate or talk about how some of the hydrocarbons may make it into the ammonia industry and how that may alleviate some of the demand.
Dr. Anas, you're on a mute if you're speaking right now.
Yeah, sorry, I did not notice. Whenever you go around the world right now and you mention ammonia, basically, people think you are talking about hydrogen. Because they are exporting a lot of ammonia for hydrogen, not for fertilizer, which is a sad story because it seems that the inflation that we are getting from the all the crops and the grains and everything else basically is going to stay with us probably for 2-3 years for now because of the shortages in fertilizers. So most of the shipments we are seeing, especially out of the Gulf, of Saudi Arabia and others, basically of ammonia is going to hydrogen. By the way, this is probably a good time to mention this. For those who attended my presentation before, and I told you at that time, there is a major problem in the long-term forecasts because all the long-term forecasts ignore the behavior and the reaction of producers. And that's a big, big problem. That's why I expect we are heading for unprecedented energy crisis. I mean, whatever energy crisis we have right now, this is nothing in front of what's coming. And if you look at what the Saudis announced yesterday, which falls into the behavior, what I call the fox behavior. The fox behavior basically is that literally they will say, okay, you don't want my oil in the future because you are switching to electric vehicles and renewable energy and everything else, and you are bad-mouthing me all the time, and you are accusing me all of these things, etc. So that's fine. I'm going to leave you alone. I'm going to take my oil away. But you want to make electric vehicles, so you don't want to use my oil, that's fine. But I will make sure that everything involved in the making of that electric vehicle is coming from my oil and gas. You want to go for wind turbines? Go for it. But I want to make sure that those wind turbines are made from my oil and gas, which means that they want to change oil to materials. So the Saudis announced they are going to switch 4 million barrels a day. So they are producing 11 today. So they are going to switch 4 million of that to materials. Where is the problem? The problem is the failure of the green policies in the West, or some of them, means by default increase in demand for oil, gas, and coal. So by the time in the future when we need that oil does not exist, because they have those big mega factories that cost billions of dollars to making materials, and that crude does not exist. So what we are going to do? So if the world is not going to come to its senses, especially the Europeans, the world is going to be a miserable place in the future. Back to you.
Hey, Dr. Anas, a follow-up question. So I grew up on a farm, and I'm trying to help project ammonia purchases for my brother and my dad, as well as diesel purchases, and timing the market in the future. And it sounds like you're saying ammonia prices will stay high, even though oil prices are low right now. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes, I mean, remember the natural gas is involved, so you got to look at natural gas too and NGLs in these situations, etc. But if you don't mind, let's chat over this, because this is a private issue. I'll be happy to talk to you privately on this and refer you to some other people who are more familiar with this rather than to make this public.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Appreciate all the expertise on all that. And I believe we had Lando next. Samit, I know you were up there next, but your request dropped, so I'll get you up after this. Lando, what's going on? Lando, can you hear us? Going once.
I still see him connecting, so maybe pop up another speaker at the same time.
Okay. All right, Samit, welcome. Samit.
I would like to take the opportunity as well to thank you, Green Candle, for hosting this wonderful space. And Dr. Anas, thank you so much for the wisdom. It's truly invaluable in these times, and everybody should drop Dr. Anas a little follow, because as you have clearly heard, his oil analysis, and not only his oil analysis, but his geopolitical understandings and how it necessarily creates to a larger and more tense situation is quite profound. And while we wait for other speakers, I would like to ask just a basic question, because I was thinking, how did Russia mitigate appropriately the 58% to 33% import drop with the oils from the EU, and essentially how is this compounding Putin's abilities to profit over these tensions?
That's a great question. Let's go back to OPEC Plus. When they created OPEC Plus, it was OPEC members, 13 countries, and then they added 10 countries to them, and part of them are Russia. And some of you heard me in previous spaces before that the connection and the ties between the Gulf states and the Russians are very strong. And OPEC Plus is not only about managing production, because even when OPEC was cutting, Russia did not cut. So what the advantage of Russia to the Saudis and the Kuwaitis and the Emiratis if Russia was not able to cut? And what I mean by that is Russia did not cut voluntarily. Russia cut when they have maintenance only, and they counted that as a cut, but they never cut voluntarily. And the reason why, because think about it this way. You have those developing countries in OPEC, and all of a sudden they have a voice in the United Nations Security Council, which is Russia. And look at the benefits to the Saudis. There were 2 votes in the UN Security Council, and both of them were very important votes. One on Yemen. Who vetoed that? Russia. And the other one on climate change. That the vote on climate change was extremely important, because if that passed, you know how crazy the Secretary General of the UN is when it comes to climate change and his attitude toward oil and gas. And what happened? Russia vetoed that. So what is the value of these votes? This value of those votes outweigh any reduction in production that Russia will make. This is a very important coalition when it comes to those political issues. So what happened? Once the sanctions were imposed, there were many problems at that time. The Biden administration was already bad-mouthing Saudi Arabia and the Crown Prince, etc., etc. And you know how bad the situation was between the Biden himself and the Crown Prince and people around Biden. While Putin was protecting them in the UN Security Council, Biden basically was bad-mouthing them in the media. So the choice was very clear. So when the sanctions started, the game was very clear. Russia will send its oil to Asia, and other countries in OPEC Plus will retreat from Asia and cover Russia somewhere else. And if you look at the pricing mechanism they adopted, it supported that. The increase in prices in Asia from those states meant, don't buy from me, go buy it from my friends, and I'm going to take my oil and ship it somewhere else to Europe. So that's how they were able to do it. Back to you.
Awesome question, David, and great response, Dr. Anas, as always. And Samit, I believe you are up now. So if you've got a question or something you'd like to
Sure,
ask, go for it.
sure. Thank you so much. Dr. Anas, thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. It's actually a pleasure, and it's something so worth learning that I always make it a point to hear everything that you say, because you are one of the best guys ever who speak about oil. So thank you very much for sharing your insights with us. So firstly, I wanted to basically understand from you that now the fact that Russian oil cap is at 60, and they've actually uh, kind of agreed, not agreed, but I mean that they've broadly said that they are going to continue to increase production, or at least maintain production at last year's levels. So do you think that in turn now will ensure that Saudi and the other guys, will not keep cutting production, because then incrementally they'll start losing market share, right? Because then I mean, suppose that these guys in Russia, continue to keep supplying to Asia, and buyers in India and China are readily taking it at a discount. Then that will actually ensure that Saudi then does not cut production, because sir, the thing is that I mean, I'm not the one who wants oil prices to go higher or lower, but I just want a stable environment, which is what even the Saudis and the OPEC guys are saying. So don't you think that this cutting of production now and then is basically more distorting the market in terms of volatility than doing anything else, sir?
Not really. Let me remind you of one thing. Within the next probably 2 to 3 hours, the president of China is going to land in Saudi Arabia, and he's going to spend 2.5 days. He's going to have 3 summits, one with the Saudis, one with the rest of the GCC members. GCC stands for Gulf Cooperation Council, 6 members. And then he's going to meet in total with 14 Arab presidents. There are 22 countries, 22 Arab countries. So he's going to meet with 14 of them in Saudi Arabia. And there is no way you can look at it that way. And he's coming to visit Saudi Arabia. And I can assure you that he is going to be received, he is going to get the same reception that President Trump got when he went there. One of the most lavish receptions that happened in Saudi history, basically, was for Trump, and she is going to get the same thing. And so this is not going to happen just because of that, because there are so many things going on. The involvement of the Saudis in China and India is very big. And as long as there is market in Europe for their oil, there is no problem. As long as the market is relatively tight, there is no problem. But one issue guarantees the continuation of the minimum market share for the GCC countries in Asia is the cost of shipping from Russia. The cost of shipping to China and India is very high. So that's going to really guarantee a minimum out of that. By the way, when we look at the maps, we look at the flat map in front of you, it is misleading because it does not show you the accurate distances in front of you, especially when it comes to the edges of the world. The edges of the world basically are very wide and big and massive. So the map shows you a short distance between Russia and China, but it's not like that. It's it's really long distance. So the shipping cost is going to guarantee a minimum of that. But the big question, and this was the subject of a column I wrote a couple of weeks ago, we all know the rules when it comes to energy security and energy policy. And one of the pillars of energy security is diversification of imports. And for a producing country, an exporting country, the rule is you want to diversify your markets. You don't want to be a hostage to one market and then get nailed. We already have seen it in Europe. We already know the problems. And the way Russia and China are going right now is really the wrong way. This is wrong because if the relationship explodes one day, both countries will be nailed and the whole world is going to suffer because of that. The increased dependence of Russia on China is a problem, and the increased dependence of China on Russia is a problem. Not only for them, even for the rest of the world. We already have seen it in Europe. And that brings us to another point, and it is related point. The dependence of Europe on US LNG is a serious problem for the US and Europe. So imagine that all of a sudden, if we have a major recession in Europe, where that LNG is going to go. Or if we have 3-4 hurricanes after each other at the end of August, early September in the United States for 3-4 weeks. So we cannot ship LNG to Europe. What's going to happen in Europe? So there is so with what's been going on with the war and the energy crises around the world, we have not learned the lessons, and policymakers have not learned their lessons. They should be diversification. It is very clear when it comes to lessons to point out that there are some people who are learning those lessons. We already seen the contract between China and Qatar on the long-term LNG contract, which is a good step to shy away from the spot market, as I explained earlier. We've seen Germany basically signing a contract, which, by the way, we discussed this in details in the Substack. For those who are interested, we discussed the Qatar-Germany thing. And one of the issues here is all of a sudden the German leadership who rejected earlier deal from Qatar, because Qatar offered them a long-term deal starting in 2026, and they asked them to sign a long-term contract, and they refused. Now they went back and told them, okay, we will take it. We will sign a deal, a long-term contract. So they are realizing that the value of security that comes from long-term contracts. So some of them are learning the lessons, but the others have not learned yet. And with that, we had the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt just ended about 2 weeks ago, 10 days ago. And the problem is the rhetoric of the climate change is still there, despite the fact that it should be less, because the harm that came from the hype was really harmful for everyone. And the countries that had the highest hype, they suffered the most. But the hype is still there. And the idea that they will continue with it makes sense to me, because it is a religion. And I seriously believe that when it is a religion and all of a sudden you go back to coal, so you sinned. Now you committed a sin. So what do you do? Regardless of religion, what religious people do when they commit a sin? They act up more religiously. And therefore, they have to talk more about climate change. Back to you.
Thank you so much.
All right, great question and great response. So now we're gonna try to get Lando back up
Yeah,
here.
I'm
Let's
back. Sorry about that. It was loading. Last time is I kind of froze and I couldn't do anything. Um,
no,
j
we hear you now.
okay,
What you
just
got?
had two questions actually. For Dr. Anas here. The first is do you feel that the price cap is the final death nail in the petrodollar system? And also the second question is because Europe pulled out of the long-term gas contract system, this now enables Russia and Iran and Qatar and the gas-producing countries to form that gas cartel. So they basically shoot themselves in both the feet on both energy fronts. Uh, I mean, they're losing on both those angles. What is your opinion on both on my questions?
I used to shy away from saying things kind of frankly the way I'm going to say them now, because I realized that I have to be this frank. Uh, this idea that you mentioned is really getting traction, and those people who mostly they are gold traders or support gold, they are really promoting that. And regardless of their nationality, regardless of their color, regardless of everything, just like this is their religion in a sense. Look, the petrodollar system is here to stay. The dollar use is going to be here to stay. Yes, probably its dominance is not going to be 80%, it's going to be 70%, but it's going to be here to stay. I'm going to discuss this from 2 points. The first point is from a currency point of view. If you look at the dominance of currencies around the world, they are related to the dominance of the country and the military dominance of the country. It is literally about the empire. If you have an empire, you are dominant, your currency is dominant. When your empire collapses, it collapses with it. So when the Great went out of Great Britain, the role of the pound basically just shrank worldwide. So as long as you see the military reach and the influence of the United States around the world the way we see it, the dollar is going to remain dominant. So this is from a currency point of view. But you want to talk about it from other point of view, especially when it comes to oil in particular. Oil has been priced in dollar, is being priced in dollar, and for the future in our lifetime will remain priced in dollar. And here we have to distinguish between pricing oil in dollar and getting revenues in non-dollar. These are two different things. So oil is priced in dollar, but you want to get euro, you want to get yuan, you want to get yen, whatever, Saudi riyal or UAE dirham, whatever. You can. There is no problem with that. Even you can get gold, you want to get Bitcoin or whatever. You can get it. But the pricing is still in dollar. And the pricing will remain in dollar regardless of anything else, simply because the US is the largest oil producer in the world, a major exporter of oil. I mean, we are exporting 5 million barrels a day. So this is next to Saudi Arabia and Russia. So as long as the United States of America is the largest producer or one of the largest producers, one of the largest exporters in the world, where it has the largest market, the largest consumer, and it has the NYMEX and all the markets in the United States and Europe, etc., it will remain priced in dollar. Now, someone might say, hold on just a second, Anas. Oil in Shanghai is priced in yuan. It is priced in the renminbi. So how do you say it's in dollar? Not well, I've did the work, and the MEC, CME basically did the work too, and our results match. If you look at the prices in Shanghai in yuan, they are a mirror image of the dollar pricing in the market of Dubai if you give it the time difference and the quality difference. What that tells you is that the pricing is still in dollar. This is just kind of a layer above it just to show you that it is really in yuan. But you adjust for exchange rates and the time and the quality, and it's exactly the same price. So pricing is still in dollar, but governments or companies can ask for non-dollars in revenues. Now, you look around the world and you find out who is doing this, who is asking to get revenues in non-dollar. They are all embargoed countries. So from a pure academic point of view, here is the question. Do we have evidence to show that countries voluntarily shy away from the dollar? We don't have that evidence yet. And this brings us to the story that was published about a few months ago. They said that since the Chinese premier is going to visit Saudi Arabia in the next few hours, I'm bringing this up. There was a story basically that said that the Saudis are going to switch their sales to China to yuan. And I went on Twitter immediately and I said, discount this story. Don't worry about it. Ignore it. This is just not a story. And the reason why is very simple. Why the Saudis would do that? So, well, they are bad at the Biden administration and this and this and this and this. Well, look, the Saudi Riyal is pegged to the dollar. If they want to nail the dollar and they were successful, they nail their own currency. That does not make sense. So that's number one. All their system is a dollar system. They will nail their system. That does not make sense. And the trade in yuan for their oil is between $40 billion to $50 billion a year. The oil trade this year is about $1.5 trillion. So the impact is minimal, even if they want to do it, and they did not do it. It's not in their interest to do it. And who is stupid enough to get rid of the dollar when the dollar is going up and other currencies are going down? So the whole story basically was kind of made up, or someone was making fun of a journalist or something. I don't know how it came about, but it did not make sense at all. So I hope I explained this in various facets, so it will be easy to understand. Back to you.
Yes, it's very clear. I just like it's give or take, and I mean eventually we'll see in 10, 20 years. But what you said is bedrock solid. It's just you keep thinking this intention by the SEO, China, Russia, India, all these countries to shy away from dollar in their energy trade and setting up this gas cartel. It's all interconnected, and it's still an aspect we have to look into, because although Russia is a sanctioned country, it's the biggest sanctioned country, and it's like an elephant in the room. And if they're moving towards this non-dollar trade in local currencies for commodities, and they're one of the leading oil producers, doesn't that take away market share from the dollar?
I mean, yes, you are right, because I said that the influence goes from, let's say, 80% to 70%, but still 70%. But let me give you an example on the power of the dollar. Now, the Iranians consider, and I'm talking about the mullahs here, they consider the United States of America as the big Satan, the big devil. And they consider the currency of the dollar basically the currency of the devil. Now, when they sell their products in the market, and you sit down with them and you have their representatives and tell them, okay, I have Bitcoin here, I have gold, I have dollar, I have euro, I have yuan. Pick up whatever currency, I'll give it to you. Guess which one they are going to use? The dollar. Go to any mafia or any gang and tell them, what do you want to use? They will tell you they want to use the dollar. Some of the mafia and some of the gangs basically will pick up the euro because of the geographic proximity. Otherwise, the dollar, even in the black market, is the dominant one. So the idea of the demise of the dollar is highly exaggerated. And you want to talk about the demise of the dollar? Think about how the U.S. basically just withdraw from the whole stage of the world and just become an island. It just happened, a big island. Then we start talking about the demise of the dollar. Back to you.
All right, great question, Lando. I appreciate you working through those technical difficulties. Phil, I believe you're next, and then Archer. Phil, are you out of the
I'm
car
out of the
this
car.
time?
Hey, what's up, Dr. Nas? Really enjoy everything that you talk about. I have a two-pronged question for you. So I have a lot of conversations in spaces like this, and I hear from people, and I believe, I bring up Russia is basically trading at a surplus, and they're saying, well, how can they during this wartime and all that? And then the second prong to my question is in regards to their oil price. I've also heard the argument that Russia actually doesn't want the price of oil to be super high, because if that's the case, then, and I'm not sure how this works, but if that's the case, then the majority of the revenue that they receive in oil really just goes to that one sector, and it doesn't get invested into the other sectors of their economy where they could be, just better invested. So I don't know if that's like too nationally explicit of questions to answer, but I was just curious on what your thoughts were.
Okay. Historically, and for those who've been following me and being on my spaces for a while, they heard me saying this, so I apologize if I'm repeating the same thing. Of course, the current situation is kind of really an outlier, so we cannot judge the current situation. We say the ruble is very high, and this and this and this, etc. All these things, it's artificially high because they pegged it or they've not pegged it, but they kind of made some maneuvers basically to increase its value, etc., and support it. But before the war, it wasn't in the interest of Russia to increase oil prices above certain levels for certain reasons, because they were afraid that the ruble will go up. And why this is important? Because about 60 to 70% of the cost of the oil companies in Russia are in domestic currency. So if the ruble goes up, then their cost goes up for nothing, and their profits shrink. And as a result, the government taxes shrink with it too. So it was the interest of the companies and the government not to raise the value of the ruble with the increase in oil prices. At the same time, there were other issues from the Russian point of view, again related to that distance and shipping and the price differentials. So there was an issue there they were worried about. But the main issue was the cost of producing oil and gas in Russia will go up substantially, proportionally to the increase of the value of the ruble if oil prices go above certain limit and the ruble start going up. To prove this point, of course, there are many examples to prove it, but I will mention to you one, and you can go back and check this in history because this was really an important part in history. When everyone who studied this will tell you, and if you read some articles, this will be mentioned in the article, said the collapse of the ruble was the rebirth of the Russian oil industry. Why? Because the cost was very low, while what they are selling in dollar was very high, and that's kind of encouraged investment. And that's when we've seen the Russian crude going substantially higher because of that. Back to you.
Yeah, thank you. That makes sense. And I know that your realm is specifically oil and gas, but another idea I've heard kicked around is that with all these ideas of green energy, I can see that as a strategy to just governments might use to grieve their people, and they'll just have that time pass, and as that time passes, they'll set up the regulatory red tape so they can have a stranglehold on nuclear. Have you considered that at all, or just what are your thoughts on nuclear and where that might be going?
Are you talking relevant to Russia or that's on its own?
Everywhere, yeah.
Okay. Generally speaking, it's very hard to make sense out of everything happening because most of the stuff happened independently. So to talk about it kind of a part of a grand plan is very hard for me to accept it. So we have to take everything kind of separately to understand it. But to think about this grand plan, I don't buy that.
Okay, so how about the EU? if we could just focus on that.
The EU is, let me give you an example, because I think this example illustrates what the problem of the EU. There was a problem in the demonstrations in Germany against nuclear is very old and goes back to the early 70s. So there is a kind of a movement that's been there, has deep roots against nuclear. And then a government came in, it was a leftist government, and they decided to phase out nuclear completely and stop it. Then Angela Merkel came in, and she came as a conservative. They won the election, and they wanted to change everything. I think she won in 2009. And they reversed some of the trends when it comes to nuclear. And basically, that was part of the platform, that they want to revive nuclear, and they extended the life or the licenses of 18, I think it was 10 and 18 reactors. So that was in 2009. Then Fukushima happened in 2011. And 2-3 days later, Merkel changed her mind and decided to be more aggressive than the leftists before her and get rid of nuclear. And people who are against nuclear praised her for that decision. And if you read some articles on this, some of them even academic articles, they will attribute that to Fukushima simply because it happened 3 days after Fukushima. But if you dig deeper, there was an election 2 days later in Germany. And the province where Merkel was losing and might lose everything, basically, was where the roots of the nuclear, the anti-nuclear movement was. So the only way she can win the election, if she really take advantage of Fukushima and announce the phase out of nuclear. So it was pure domestic issue, has nothing to do with the EU, has nothing to do with anything else. It was just about winning the election in Germany. So it's very hard to look at it as it is an EU thing based on the evidence. Back to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question, Phil. We got a few others, and Dr. Anas has some limited time, so I think we're gonna have to move on. Archer, welcome to the stage. What you got?
Thank you. You mentioned, Dr. Anas, you mentioned a couple minutes ago the European natural gas situation. Was curious if you could talk about how we would read articles late summer, early fall. Germany's at 100% storage, and then turn around and read articles about how this industry is shutting down this plant or they're reducing capacity. BASF is concerned about their Ludwigshafen plant, whether they can power it. So it's like mixed messages, whether they were actually able to hit 100% of a functioning, robust economy, or was it 100% of a maintenance economy to maybe make it to the spring. So I was curious if you could just amplify what that 100% storage number actually means. Thank you.
This is an advice for whoever trading, or if you are dealing with equities, etc. We work in the market, and you watch the market every day, and you read Twitter, and you read various newspapers. Seriously, you got to be very careful with the media in various ways. And you got to remember the fact that the journalists are overworked, underpaid, and they have to finish the article on a deadline. You have to keep that in mind all the time. And under those circumstances, you got to understand how the story basically is so focused, and it's your job as a reader to put it in perspective and put it within the larger picture. If you just take it as is like that, and you forgot how those journalists operate, again, they are overworked and underpaid, and they have to finish within a deadline. So you have to think about it from that way, and you got to put the frame for that story. And if you fail to do it, then you end up with serious problems. We already have seen several examples in recent weeks on that, including that story about the increase in production by OPEC. Before that, the UN story or others. So where is the problem? The problem is and this goes back to the idea of statistics. Historically speaking, when they used to say, well, historically the storage was always 80% and they survived, and now it's 100%. Well, the flow of gas from Russia was continuous from all sides, and they forgot about that part. That yes, it was 80% full, but all the pipelines basically were flowing with gas, and now only very few of them are flowing with gas. So 100% does not mean much. Yeah, it makes the situation a little bit better, but not much, because we need that gas to be flowing. And that's really where the mistake is, that those media reports did not put the whole picture together to tell you what's going on. The other issue related to this is they talk about the EU. All the numbers basically is an average and for the whole EU. That does not make sense. Because if you look even at shortages of electricity in Europe right now, you see some areas basically are not affected at all. And some areas basically they have some major shortages, but we always get the averages and the whole picture about everyone. That does not make sense either. So yes, the storage is 100% full, but to be successful, we need the flow of all those pipelines. The replacement is LNG, and they have a lot of LNG coming in. The problem is it is extremely expensive. Think about it this way. The cost of energy this year in the EU is $700 billion. Only energy, the cost of energy, $700 billion. Where that money is going to come from? And yet the government's committed and made the big mistake of offering subsidies. They always preached around the world that we need to stop fossil fuel subsidies. We need to, and they've been telling the Africans and Latin Americans and others, stop fuel subsidies. And they are the first abuser to do it when they got stuck. And now we have fossil fuel subsidies in several countries in Europe. What does that mean? If they let prices high, then people will conserve on their own and markets will adjust. If you give compensation to people, then they are not going to adjust their consumption, and therefore the demand is going to continue, and we are going to move on to next year, and we are going to have the same problems. But the bottom line is where that money is going to come from. Well, if you look at the UK, what the UK did was something really contradictory. What they've done, they said, okay, we are offering those fossil fuel subsidies to people so we can reduce the pressure on them and we can reduce inflation, the impact of inflation on them. But we need the money. Where we are going to get it? We are going to impose an excise profit tax on oil and gas companies operating in the North Sea and within the UK. And we are going to take that excise profit tax that we collected from the companies and we are going to give it to people. Well, again, back to the beginning of the space today when we talked about the unintended consequences. What happened? Well, we have companies who said, oh, by the way, I was trying to build this project in the North Sea, and now I'm going to leave. Lower investment and lower production. And then other companies came in and said, well, I was going to build this massive wind turbine farm in the middle of the ocean, and I'm going to spend $25 billion on it to meet what you guys want, which is the green energy. But by the way, you just took the money from me and I cannot build this project anymore. So they got hit on all fronts when it comes to oil and gas and renewable energy because of those policies. And you can see the impact of that and and how it backfired on them. Back to you.
All right, great question, Archer. Thanks for waiting around. And we, just forewarning for everybody in the crowd, we're going to do a hard stop here at 10 p.m., so in 12 minutes, because Dr. Anas has been very generous with his time, so we're going to try to get everybody up with their questions, but just know that you might not get your question answered if you're requesting just this late. So Dr. Anas, thanks again. Tato, I believe it is. What you got for us?
Okay, Anas, you were asking, sorry for my English, I'm from Mexico, but you were telling about the SWIFT, that it's not restricted in Russia. That's a subject that really interests me. Is it because it's being avoided or it's not being implemented, the restrictions?
Will you repeat the first part of the question because it wasn't clear to me, please?
Okay. On the SWIFT part, you mentioned earlier during the conversation that most of the media is saying that it's basically banned, right? That the SWIFT system is not working anymore, but you mentioned that it's still functioning. Is it because they're going around it, or is it still functioning like regularly?
No, they just targeted certain banks, and that was it. And they left the rest of the banks.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, thanks for the quick one. All right, we've got Elliot here. Elliot, what's going on? What you got for us?
Hi, Dr. Anas. My question is, it seems clear that Russia could bring the Western nations to their knees economically if they withhold a certain amount of oil and cause a major spike in the price. How likely do you think this is, and what is the amount of production that would be needed to make something like that happen?
Do you hear me now because I switched microphones?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. All right. I'm not going to be able to answer this question this way because really I don't have an answer. But I can tell you something from history of studying the Russian oil and gas, that since Putin, and I really hate, I mean, this is like really hard for me to say, because the last thing I want to appear is defending Putin or defending Russia. I seriously think that Putin is a criminal and he's a killer, and I believe that. But if you study his energy policy since he came to power, you find out that he really tried to convince Europe and try to be a very dependable supplier of energy. And he did the impossible to achieve this goal over a period over 20 years. And all the disruptions that happened historically happened because of Ukraine, did not happen because of Russia. There is not a single example to show historically that they were trying to violate this principle. And they understood it, that continuous supply at relatively low prices is going to ensure the continuation of revenues to Russia for a very long time, despite all the hype of green energy and climate change and everything else. But he had to keep it like this, just steady and low. And that's what he's done historically, until things just exploded in the last year or so. So the policy basically shows that he really wanted to do that. And I seriously think that they are thinking right now about what's after the war, what's after this Ukraine thing finishes. And if you look at the statements last week, we have two statements. They were amazing statements. One of them by the German Chancellor, Scholz, when he said that he will meet Putin under certain conditions. And then Biden said something similar to it. Why this is important? Because if you go back in history and study every dispute like this around the world, the solution always started like this. I will talk with him under those conditions. And then after a while, this, and they end up with a solution, end up with a meeting and handshake, and everything is fine. So everyone probably, especially the Germans, are thinking, and we have another statement from France, I think, about bringing back Russia to the fold. I think that he used that word, to the fold. So everyone right now is thinking about what's after Ukraine. This is not the end of life. And therefore, they still need the Russian gas and they need the Russian oil. And this is, we had a space in Arabic earlier today, and we had a very large crowd where it was sponsored by Attaqa.net. And this came up, and people must realize the following. First of all, there is no replacement to Russian gas. All the replacement that people are talking about, aside from Qatar, is only to meet the growth in demand in the future, not a replacement to the Russian gas. The demand for gas is going to explode in the future. That's why I said before, and you heard me before saying that I am more bullish on gas in the future in the long run than oil. because the demand is going to explode. And therefore, if you talk about the Nigerian gas pipeline through Morocco or Algeria, or you talk about the increase in Algeria or the Eastern Mediterranean, all of that, that's barely enough just to meet the increase in demand. So where is the replacement for Russian oil? Well, we have Qatar, because they are going to add from 77 ton, they are going to go to 126 million ton. So that's a major increase. And that's basically is going to play a role here in some replacement, but that's it. So Europe cannot really replace all Russian gas. They can reduce dependence, but they cannot increase they cannot replace all of it. The second point, and this is very important, if we are going to find a resolution to Russia and Ukraine, and then Russia is going to come back to the fold, whatever, just pick up any time frame, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. Even if you talk about 10 years from now, we got to be careful talking about all those projects that everyone is trying to promote right now as a replacement to the Russian gas. We have the Israelis are promoting their gas pipeline. Others are promoting the Egyptian pipeline. They are trying to promote the Eastern Mediterranean pipeline, which is different from that. They are trying to promote, well, let's calm Libya a little bit and do some exploration there. And then we have the Nigerian gas pipeline being promoted. These projects might be literally has no value if Russia comes back. And no one is going to talk about them anymore. And there will be literally local gas. Probably they will use it locally, and that's it. So the implication of Russia coming back to the fold is very significant, because several multi-billion-dollar projects are being promoted as a replacement, and they might go up in the wind in a minute the moment they announce some sort of resolution to Russian issues. Back to you.
All right, great question. And obviously great response from Dr. Anas. So I think we have time for maybe one last one. And so I'm sorry if you didn't get your question asked, but unless this is a quick one, Mr. Singh, you are our last one. So what you got for us?
Thank you so much. Nas, a quick question here. With all this, talk about the G7 price cap and everything, there is absolutely no mention about the substandard shipping, which is coming to Europe now as a result of all that is happening, and we already know there's parallel dark shipping which is operating. So what do you have on that? Because in all this, with all the inflation and all the other pressures, I think the last thing which Europe needs is an ecological disaster literally at its doorstep. Thank you.
Dr. Anas, I think I saw you come off mute, but then go back on.
I'm going to say something funny here, because energy security is driving politics right now, and everyone wants the energy sources. So imagine this. Imagine all the European leaders, and imagine that all of them are going to turn the blind eye to everything you mentioned, turn blind eye to all the smuggling and all the substandard of anything they get, and everyone is just staring at the horizon. Just imagine that picture, and that's literally that's what's going to happen on the ground. Everyone is going to be staring at the horizon, turning the blind eye to every miserable things that are going to happen simply because they want those energy sources. And the worst thing that can happen is you have a city in Europe with no heat, and temperatures are minus 25, and elderly people are dying, freezing. I mean, that news enough basically to ruin every politician's life and career if this happens. So they understand that, and that's why this is part of the things why energy security is driving politics around the world right now. And do not be surprised if the Saudis and OPEC Plus and others are taking advantage of it, and Putin is taking advantage of it. That's the common sense. Just the common sense. But the sad thing is they are allowing every crook in the shipping industry to benefit from it. Back to you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Anas. I can't thank you enough for coming up and sharing your wisdom and everything that's going on in oil after the OPEC meeting on Sunday. And everybody in the crowd, if you haven't checked it out yet, his Substack is pinned at the top at this space right now, and you get a 7-day free trial. So you could read this latest article. You can see how Dr. Anas has absolutely nailed it. All the events transpiring. He wrote it on Saturday. OPEC meeting was on Sunday, so you can kind of see how his predictions panned out. And so, yeah, Dr. Anas, with that, do you have anything else going on that you'd like to let everybody in the crowd know that you have?
Yes. One thing is, because people were complaining about the pricing of this Substack. This Substack basically was directed at companies and traders. I'll give you a true example so you understand. It's not priced for the individual guy who is trading some equities at $50,000 or $100,000, and he's playing with that. This is not intended for those people. Just to give you an example, if you recall the story in the news in the Wall Street Journal, when they published this story, they said that Saudis are discussing with other OPEC members increasing production by 500,000 instead of cutting production. And I went up that morning and I put a tweet. I said, ignore the Wall Street Journal article. Well, I can tell you, this is a true story. A trader basically took that. He did make about $2.5 million that day, just from that tweet. So when those who are complaining about the pricing of it, you got to look at it that way instead of looking at you personally. But we are going to start a new subscription for about $30 a month. It's completely different from this one, but we will remove the paywall for those subscribers from time to time so they can read some of the issues, especially that are important to the market. So there will be another newsletter starting in January with a very low subscription rate. Back to you.
Yeah, so definitely check out those newsletters. Obviously, well written. He puts in a ton of time into them, and it has a jam-packed great information. And for those who didn't get the full audio, the space was recorded. I'm also going to put it on my podcast and YouTube feed early next week, so be on the lookout for that. And I do these spaces every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern time and go for a couple hours or so. So I appreciate everybody tuning in, and I appreciate the special guest, Dr. Anas, coming in, and of course David co-hosting up here with me as well. And so, yeah, I hope to see you guys all back next week, and have a great rest of your night. Dr. Anas, thanks again.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.